are equal, but they can't speak up.
Borderlines on Nigeria Info every Friday at 4 p.m. The world is changing. Don't just watch, understand it. Nigeria Info. Let's talk.
Welcome back to Borderlines, the only show that takes you beyond borders. My next guest was here last week. I still say he's a friend of the house. He may disagree with me, but we do have an interesting, challenging and interrogative conversation. Last week, we were not able to answer your calls. This week, I will open up the lines so you are able to ask him questions or make comments. So I'm going to get right down to it. Ambassador Michael Freeman. He's the ambassador, the Israeli ambassador to Nigeria. Welcome back to Borderlines.
Thank you. Always a pleasure to be here.
Indeed. Right, so let's get straight to it. Last week, one of the things we discussed and you and I disagreed on is the 15 Palestinian paramedics and the aid worker who were found buried under sand with including one of the ambulances. Last week you said that they didn't have their lights on, and you also said some of them were, or at least in jihad, right? The day after our interview, further, evidence came out from phone that was found on one of the ambulance, the paramedics who was killed. I would like to play this for you, and then I'd like your comment on it, please. Please, go ahead.
يما سامحيني يما هذه هي الطريقة اللي اخترتها يما إني أساعد الناس سامحيني يما سامحيني.
This is the moment when 15 medical workers were killed by Israeli forces. This video, taken by one of the workers, Rifat, documents their last moments. Attacks on humanitarian workers can constitute a war crime, and they're in total violation of international humanitarian and human rights law. It is shortly before dawn on the 23rd of March. The first rays of sunlight can be seen as a convoy of Palestinian Red Crescent ambulances are travelling on a road to the north of Rafah, searching for missing colleagues. The Israeli military would later claim that they didn't have their emergency lights on. This video shows very clearly that in fact they did. The convoy spots the missing ambulance on the side of the road, so they pull over. The paramedics wearing their uniforms get out and start to move towards the vehicle. Israeli soldiers then open fire. The video goes black, but the mobile phone keeps recording for another 5 minutes. One of the paramedics, Rifat Redwan, can be desperately heard reciting the Shahada, the Muslim prayer before death.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمد رسول الله.
Much of which is almost constant gunfire.
هذه هي الطريقة اللي اخترتها يما إني أساعد الناس سامحيني يما سامحيني.
He was later found with a bullet in his head and this mobile phone still on him. It was 5 days before the IDF gave permission to the United Nations to retrieve the 15 bodies. They were found in a mass grave and their vehicles crushed beside them. The Israeli military has claimed that 8 of the dead were Hamas. They have not yet provided any evidence of that. The Israeli military has also claimed that the vehicles were travelling without coordination in a combat zone. But a Sky News investigation has revealed that an evacuation order was not issued by the IDF for that area until at least an hour after the incident.
Their ambulances were clearly marked and they should have returned to the families. They did not. Even in the most complex conflict zones, there are rules. These rules of international humanitarian law could not be clearer. Civilians must be protected. Humanitarians must be protected. Health services must be protected.
Following the emergence of the video, the IDF has released a new statement saying that all claims including documentation circulating about the incident, will be thoroughly and deeply examined to understand the sequence of events and the handling of the situation. More than 400 aid workers have been killed during the 18 months war in Gaza, as well as tens of thousands of civilians. Israel's version of events, often claiming that the targets were Hamas, have rarely been proven or disproven because of the lack of public evidence. On this occasion, this video undermines and contradicts the IDF's justification for attacking the Palestinian ambulances. And it will, inevitably, confirm in some people's minds the accusation that war crimes are being committed in Gaza and covered up.
Ambassador, I'd like to get your comments on that report, please. That was by Alistair Bunkle of Sky News. I'd like to get your comments, please.
Look, I don't think we needed to play the whole clip, but obviously it's your show. You can play what you want. You could have asked me the question, I would have answered. With the initial report, as I said last week, was that they were travelling without lights. That's now proven to be incorrect. The Army, the IDF, has ordered an immediate inquiry. That inquiry is ongoing as to exactly what happened, to see if the troops who gave the report gave an accurate report or they misled, and what the result of that will be published. And once we have the result of that, if actions were taken by IDF troops that were illegal, that were wrong, that were immoral, that were against the rules of engagement, then there will be consequences to that. But at this point, we are investigating. We will see what happens, and we will go forward from there.
Okay, last year, a little girl, I think she was 5, 6 years old, Hind Rajab, was killed in her car. The paramedics who were going to help her were also killed. Israel did say they would be doing an investigation. Do we have any update on that investigation yet?
Well, I haven't seen the results of that investigation. It doesn't mean it hasn't been concluded, but I haven't seen the results of that investigation. But next time I'm on, I'll make sure before that I get a full update and I can update you as exactly where we're at with that investigation.
Okay. I don't know whether you were able to hear my previous guest, Daniel Levy. Were you able to listen?
I heard parts.
You heard parts.
I heard parts.
Right, you heard parts of it. You would have heard him discussing. I asked him the same question that I did ask you about the ceasefire. Would you agree with Daniel Levy with regards to why the ceasefire fell apart? Because what you said last week and what Daniel, who is also an analyst, is saying is quite different.
It is quite different because we have two completely different perspectives. You're asking me for the Israeli perspective. The Israeli perspective is that Hamas refused point blank to lay down their arms. They were making outrageous and unrealistic demands. At the same time, they were using that ceasefire to rearm and to prepare for further attacks on Israeli troops and on Israeli citizens inside Israel. And so the ceasefire fell apart. There were a number of offers to continue the ceasefire, including from the mediators, and Hamas rejected everyone. Israel accepted everyone. So the reason it fell apart is because Hamas refused to lay down their arms. They were planning attacks, further attacks on Israeli citizens and on Israeli army, and they were unwilling to release hostages. That's why the ceasefire fell apart.
And last week, I did ask, because we did check, perhaps you are able to read something to us now, because every single post, investigation, research I did kept saying Israel, confirmed that Israel pulled out of the ceasefire. Every single one that I read said Hamas is supposed to drop their weapons in phase 3. What you're saying is relatively different. Are you able to provide us any evidence?
Evidence of what? That
to
Hamas
back up what you're
refused to
saying.
lay down their arms?
Yes, you're saying.
Well, the evidence is that Hamas openly said they won't lay down their arms. Before the show, I made sure that we sent you links so that you could see all of that information. And Hamas are very clear.
I didn't get any
weren't
links, if I may say. I'm literally checking now. There were no links sent to me. And what you're saying, I want to be clear again, is that you're saying Hamas refuses. Oh, your screen. Okay, the screen keeps moving. You're saying that Hamas refuses to lay down their arms. During which phase? During phase 1?
Well, it doesn't matter at what phase, because I'll explain this to you. I tried to explain this. I'll give you an analogy, and it's the best analogy I can give, which is if you and me are going to buy a house, I'm buying my house from you. And we say there are 3 stages to buying that house. Stage 1 is I'm going to come and look at the house. Stage 2 is that we're going to have a contract and we're going to exchange contracts. And stage 3 is I'm going to pay you and you're going to give me the house. If we go through stage 1 and I come and I see the house, and then you say, right, now it's time to move on to stage 2. And I say to you, let me just be very clear, though. I'm happy to move to stage 2, but just so I'm clear, stage 3, where I'm meant to pay you the money, I will never, ever, ever pay you the money. You will never get a penny from me. I will take your house, but you won't get any money from me. Are you going to move on to stage 2 and exchange contracts? Of course you're not. No one in their right mind is going to go on to stage 2 when one of the parties has said stage 3 is utterly out of question and will never happen. So Hamas was saying they will never, ever agree to stage 3. But we, the Israelis, are meant to move to stage 2 and give the Hamas exactly what they asked for, even though they've openly said they will never move to stage 3. It's a preposterous request. Nobody would stand by that. You wouldn't do it if we were talking about your house. And no one would do it when we're dealing with things much more serious than a house, which is the lives of Israeli citizens. And so we weren't prepared to do that. It was clear, it was obvious that Hamas were not negotiating in good faith, had no intention of negotiating in good faith, and rather were just trying to drag things out.
We were still at stage 1, number 1. Number 2, even Steve Witkoff went to speak directly with Hamas. Why did Israel have a problem with Steve Witkoff speaking directly with Hamas, trying to negotiate? Because one thing Hamas continued and has repeated over and over again is, let's move to stage 2. They did not want to discuss stage 3 during stage 1. Israel, on the other hand, wanted to change the framework and discuss everything during stage 1. Permit me to finish, Ambassador. In addition to that, this was the same deal that has been on the table since last year. So that Prime Minister Netanyahu signed to in January, and President Trump became a sponsor of, if you like, in January. Why then does Israel want to change terms halfway through? I'm not saying Hamas didn't say that. I am saying to you, you mentioned about the house analogy. Changing terms. You and I are British. You're British, I'm British. We've both bought houses before. At every stage, right? You don't get to change the deal. You literally don't. Once you've made an offer, once the offer has been accepted, you move on to conveyancing, survey, etc. So why is it that Israel wants to change the framework of a deal that has been on the table, permit me, since last year, which Israel signed to, negotiated on, agreed to by January, which is also sponsored and got a gold tick from President Trump?
Well, we go back to this housing thing. As I said to you, you want to use the British analogy, we can use it. We can go on to conveyancing. But if I'm saying to you at every stage, I'm not going to pay you, you're not going to carry on and sell your house to me. If I'm saying to you over and over and over again, I will never, ever pay you. You don't. Okay, fair enough. Let's exchange contracts. I'm saying you've got no intent of paying me. You clearly wouldn't go down that way. And laying down their arms, they made very clear that we went through stage 2, no intention of going to stage 3. They had the most to gain from stage 2, but they wouldn't go to stage 3. And be very, very clear here. President Trump said if all of the hostages aren't free immediately, the gates of hell will open. Well, we didn't open the gates of hell immediately. We waited, and we waited, and we waited, and we waited some more. And Hamas still refused to release hostages. We have to understand here, there are 59 hostages being held by Hamas. 59 innocents that have been held by Hamas that they are refusing to release. That is the crux of the issue here. You can talk to me about stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. You can talk to me about anything you like. But Hamas needs to release the hostages. Without releasing the hostages, there is no ceasefire. There is no moving forward. And Hamas are refusing to release the hostages. Hostages that they should never, ever have taken in the first place.
Under English law, once you have a contract to sell the house, it's specifically enforceable. So how can it be preposterous? You agreed?
Well, because it's not.
No, permit me, because we're speaking to a Nigerian audience. I mean, we have an international audience. Let me just finish. You agreed on the basis of that agreement, Hamas release hostages. How can Israel then be trusted to keeping its obligations if Israel is changing terms during stage 1? But that's what you did.
But we're not changing.
That's what you did.
Let me please. We didn't. This is the bit we can't seem to get our head around, and we need to move on from here. And I'll explain it again. The issue wasn't that. The issue was that Hamas said very clearly they will never, ever, ever lay down their arms. They said we won't release hostages, and they planned further attacks on Israeli civilians. That is what they were using the ceasefire for, not to better the lives of Palestinians, not to plan for the future, but to plan further October 7th style attacks on Israeli citizens. That's what they were doing. And Israel said, like any other country in the world would, well, listen, if ultimately your aim is to carry on building and controlling and building up your arms in order to attack us and massacre us and murder us and rape us and burn us alive and torture us again, we are not going to enter into those negotiations. There cannot be any answer to this problem that leaves Hamas with their weapons and with their arms. That is non-negotiable. It cannot happen.
Okay, Ambassador, before we move on, I do have to stick to this ceasefire. And I've got a question for you. There was a ceasefire. Let's even take your word for it. There was a ceasefire. Everybody was supposed to drop their arms. No more killing is what a ceasefire means. It means cease fire. Yet Israel did not stop killing Palestinians in Gaza, did it?
During the ceasefire, there was no firing. There was no. The ceasefire took place, okay, and that's what happened. During that ceasefire, Hamas broke the terms of the ceasefire on numerous occasions. They rearmed. They tried to attack.
Ambassador, we're not going to go back to Hamas right now. I am saying to you that during the ceasefire, Israel continued to actually kill Palestinians. They didn't completely drop the ceasefire. In actual fact, let's talk about ceasefire. Hamas is regrouping, Hamas is this. Fine, I take your word for it. Part of the terms of phase 1 is humanitarian aid. You say there's plenty of food. Hamas is eating all the food. Is Hamas also taking all the medication? Is Hamas using all the medication? Would Hamas use all the tents and the mobile homes that Israel was agreed to supply? Even if Hamas is eating all the food, why then do you stop? Is Hamas the only people, only members, only Palestinians who will drink water? Because when we talk about these things, we have to talk about it from the point of not just humanitarian law, not just international law, but the logic of humanity and being alive. Boko Haram is in Nigeria. Boko Haram is in Nigeria. Nigerian government cannot, under any circumstances, stop water and food and responsibility because the north is part of Nigeria. And at this particular moment, Israel is the occupying territory, is the occupying force in Gaza.
So I have a couple of questions for you, because it's important we clarify this. What percentage of water, you say that we cut off the water, do you know what percentage of water comes from the Gaza Strip itself? Not from Israel, from the Gaza Strip. What percentage of water for the Gaza?
70% of the 70. So permit me, 70% of the water to Gaza has been shut by Israel.
Okay, so that's not true.
Okay.
90% of all the water that is in Gaza is produced in Gaza through a desalination plant and through aquifers and through other things. Okay, the other reality is this: that it's not about Hamas eating the food. It's not about Hamas using the medication. It's about Hamas stealing the food, stealing the medication, stealing the tents, using it as a method to stay in power, using it as a method to strengthen their army, to their terrorist army, using it as a method to entrench their power and entrench their terrorism over there. That is what's going on. That is the reality of what Hamas are doing. And according to international law, when you do not have to provide any allowed aid in, if there is a reasonable belief that the people inside will use that for military aims. And we have reasonable belief that Hamas will be using that aid in order to further their military aims and their military objectives.
Article 2 of the Genocide Convention states, as the
but you need to have a look at it. That's the wrong convention. It's the wrong convention.
Okay, what convention would you like us to use? Because you are claiming Israel doesn't have a responsibility as the occupying force in an occupied land. Fine, let's go back. Has Hamas been degraded? Has Hamas been degraded?
Hold on 1 second. Firstly, Israel, I remind you, and I remind all your listeners, that in 2005, Israel left Gaza. We do not occupy Gaza. We never occupied Gaza since 2005. The people who were running Gaza were Hamas. The Palestinians were in charge of Gaza. And as I'm sure you know from your extensive knowledge of this area, Israel only controls part of the borders. Egypt also controls the borders. 2005 up and still has borders with Gaza. When Israel is second, the most important thing I've emphasized again is that Israel withdrew. Israel withdrew in 2005. There was no occupation. There wasn't a single Israeli soldier. There wasn't a single Israeli citizen. There wasn't a single Israeli settler. There was no Israeli inside Gaza since 2005. And yet, what did we bring? We brought rockets, we brought terrorism, and we brought October the 7th. So if we're going to talk about history, let's at least be accurate and remind everybody there has been no occupation, as you call it, since 2005. There was food and aid and everything else flowing in and out, and Hamas was receiving billions, not millions, B with a B, billions of dollars of aid from around the world. And what did they do with that? They did two things. One, they stole it. Their leaders living in Qatar are billionaires, worth $3, $4, $5 billion each. And the rest of the money they used to build an underground tunnel network in order to hide their terrorists, in order to kidnap hostages, and they built rockets and missiles and guns. That's what they did with the money since 2005. They did nothing for the Palestinians. Had they have chosen to build hospitals or schools or universities or any of those things, we'd be having a very different conversation.
Well, they did build hospitals. Israel has literally destroyed, bombed 99% of the hospitals in Gaza. Let me go back to this. Let me please go forward, or at least go back to the waters. The Palestinian Water Authority announced that the occupation army destroyed the water desalination plants during its recent ground operations in the northern Gaza Strip. That's 70% of Palestinians' water sources. This was only a couple of days ago, Ambassador. But let me go back. I need to ask you, you keep mentioning that Hamas is regrouping. Hamas wants to recommit the massacre of October 7th. You mentioned history. Of course, you and I must admit, and at the very least accept, that history did not begin on October 7th. History of that area began in 1948. In fact, we can go back as far as Balfour Declaration, but we won't do that. Let's talk about Hamas. No, let's talk about Hamas. You mentioned history, and like you said, history matters. Let's talk about Hamas. I thought Israel, or at least Israel says, that they've been able to destroy Hamas.
Okay, so 2 points. Firstly, if we're going to talk about history, let's at least go back to 3,000 years, because that's when the Jews were in the state of Israel and have been in the state of Israel ever since 3,000 years.
If that's the case, then I'm going to have to ask you then, why is it then that if me, Ireti Bakare-Yusuf, a British Nigerian, if I convert to Judaism, I am able to move to Israel and have more rights on the land of the Palestinians than somebody who is of that land? We will not be able to finish this show if we go back and forth.
No, but I do want to answer that because that's a critical question. And I think
Okay.
it's important that you and all of your listeners understand that. So we need to understand that Israel, the land of Israel, is the biblical homeland. It is the historical homeland of the Jewish people. The people that live in Israel today live in the same land, speak the same language, keep the same customs, have the same traditions, have the same religion, and have the same dynamic that they did 3,000 years ago. Okay, let's be very, very clear about that. We speak the same language, have the same customs, have the same in the same geographical location that the Jews were in 3,000 years ago. So that is the reality of the situation. Now, the Judaism is both a religion, and it is a nation, and it is a people, and it is a culture. If somebody wishes to convert to Judaism and take on all of the tenets of Judaism, and it's a very long process. If you want to take that on, and it can take up to 7 years, by the way, to convert, and you want to do that, and you want to spend those 7 years, and you are convinced that you want to be a part of the Jewish people, and you should know that Judaism does not encourage conversion. It's not something that we encourage as a religion. But if that's what you decided you wanted to do, and then after all those many years, you decided that that's what you want to do, and you were part of the Jewish people, and this is very important, then, and you felt that your homeland was with the Jewish people and you wanted to be with the rest of the Jewish people, and that's a decision for you to make. But the Jewish homeland is in the state of Israel. There isn't any discussion about that. It's the same homeland we've had for 3,000 years, where we speak the same language, have the same culture, have the same land, have the same history, and have the same traditions that we kept 3,000 years ago. It's very clear that's our indigenous homeland.
Okay, then I need to ask you then. Nobody can doubt the fact that they are all Abrahamic religions, children of Abraham. Why then doesn't Israel actually accept the Palestinians as their brother? After all, even Joseph forgave his brother for selling him into slavery.
Well,
why?
14 times we offered the Palestinians a state, and 14 times they rejected it. So when you keep asking me the question, why don't we offer? We've offered over and over and over and over again. The international community offered over and over and over again, and the Palestinians rejected over and over and over again. So really the question you should be asking is not to me, but to the representatives of the Palestinians that you have on your show, to ask them, why did you reject in 1936? Why did you reject in 1947? Why did you reject in 1968? Why did you reject in 2000? Why did you reject in 2002? Why did you reject in 2004? Why did you reject the many, 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 many times they rejected? That's the question you need to be asking.
Okay, I should
and
ask
understand.
them.
And I'll tell you what the answer will be.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you what the answer will be. They will tell you they don't want to divide their ancient homeland because they don't believe the Jews have any right to be there. They don't believe that the Jews have any claim to that land whatsoever. From their perspective, we don't deserve to be there. They don't accept our history. They don't accept our claim to the land. And that is the absolute crux of the conflict in the region.
Okay. You said 3,000 years ago, Jewish people were in Israel, correct? Right.
Absolutely.
Was Jesus a Jew?
Absolutely.
So, yet he was Christian.
Well, no, he wasn't actually. He wasn't a Christian. He was a Jew and he died a Jew. His followers created Christianity, not him.
His followers? Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's not get into that. What I will say is that the Palestinians of today are Semites. The Israelis, the Jewish people are Semites. Both are Semites. So when we talk about this land, we have to talk about them as two brothers, two people of the same land. But we need to move on. There's so much, so you've got to come back more often. Because honestly, my callers are calling and we haven't even gone that very far yet. Very far. So let's talk about children.
Just on that point.
Pardon? Yeah.
Okay. We can talk about children.
Let's talk about children. Israel released 10 Palestinian prisoners this week. Just this week. It was a surprise. However, there was a 14-year-old boy, Ahmed Mansara, who was jailed as a child and was released 10 years later. He was jailed for attempted murder, even though He was convicted of attempted murder, even though he didn't try to murder anybody. His brother was the one doing it. Anyway, what I want to ask you is, why does Israel jail children as young as 12?
Again, I would ask the question, why do children as young as 12 try and murder Israelis? Why do children as young as 12 stab Israelis? Why do they throw stones at cars and cause them to crash? Why do they have this hatred inside them? And it's a really good question. Why is it that all of these children have been educated and brought up to hate Israelis, to hate Jews? And the answer is because the Palestinian education system is warped. The Palestinian education system teaches that the Jews are the enemy, that the Jews are the usurpers, and the Jews need to be killed. And that's part of the problem. There is an education system that is educating an entire generation of young Palestinians to go out and kill Jews and kill Israelis. And when they do that, like any country in the world, we catch those people who do that, we try them, we put them in prison after they've been convicted. And if you try and murder someone, I don't care if you're 10, 11, 12 or 35. If you try and murder someone or you murder someone, you will go to prison.
But you know B'Tselem, right? B'Tselem, the Israeli Information Center for Human Rights. They claim that as of December 2024, they reported that Israeli prison service was holding 3,327 Palestinians in administrative detention. The practice allows for imprisonment without charge or trial, often based on undisclosed evidence. I have to ask again, even in Nigeria, in England, where you and I have both lived, where you're from, and I'm also from, children do commit crimes, right? They get sent to children's, in our time, they were called bostels, right? They get sent to children's prisons for rehabilitation. You say Palestinian children have been indoctrinated into hating Jews. Why then does Israel torture these children whom you say have been indoctrinated? Are we then holding children responsible for the acts of adults?
Well, two things. Firstly, Israel doesn't torture children. That's a ridiculous accusation with no basis whatsoever. But more than that, if you're talking about the UK and you want to talk about the UK, I'm sure you.
Well, I'm just making reference because you and I were there. We grew up.
But we both remember the Jamie Bulger case.
Absolutely,
it's probably more relevant to people.
Absolutely.
Yet the people who carried that out, according to the time, if you remember, people said that they were influenced and they were by adult movies, by Chucky the Clown and the movie that they'd seen, and I can't remember the name of the movie. You may remember it, but the two children, the 10 and the 11-year-old, were jailed, and they were jailed for a very, very long time for murdering poor James Bulger. Even though everybody accepted they were influenced by a film that was made by adults.
Okay.
The fact that adults are influencing young people is terrible. And I agree with you, by the way. I want to hold the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian people who are building that education curriculum, I want to hold them responsible for what they're doing. But you cannot say because somebody's been taught or because they've got this information that we have to let them off. Not every Palestinian child stabs an Israeli. Not every Palestinian child tries to kill a Jew. Not every Palestinian child grows up to be a terrorist. So clearly it's not only the education system. There needs to be something else that's going on as well. The education system is indeed rotten. The education system does indeed need work. But these people carried out terror attacks. And there is nowhere in the world, there is no court in the world that would allow a 12-year-old to stab someone, would allow a 12-year-old to try and murder someone and say, well, you were influenced badly, you can go home now. That's never going to happen. They have to pay for their crimes, they have to go to prison, and they have to pay for what they've done.
Okay, very quickly, if I may say, because we need to move on. You and I, like I said, our conversations are so interrogative. The same education system in Israel teaches Jews to hate Arabs. My first guest was Miko Peled when I started Borderlines. Miko Peled, he spoke of indoctrination. We've had Ilan Papi. He speaks. You have groups such as Breaking the Silence. They speak of the indoctrination. We've had Lily Greenberg who spoke. So we've had so many, and I get a lot of Jewish guests who say, this is how we were taught. We never met a single Arab until this, because I remember Miko Peled specifically, and if you know who Miko Peled is, his sisters, his niece.
I certainly know Miko Peled.
Yes, his niece.
Miko Peled is a deeply problematic person.
Right. Well, you know, his niece was actually killed by his niece was killed by a Palestinian terrorist attack. Yes,
I know Miko's story.
Right. So Miko said, all his life, he was brought up to hate Arabs and to be afraid of Arabs. He then said, when his eyes finally opened and he decided to go to Gaza, he just said, you know what? I was told they will kill me. If they kill me, so be it. But I've got to do this. And then he could not believe the reception. So what I'm saying to you is the same hate that you say is in the education system in Palestine is also in Israel, as confirmed by many Jews. At which point, and this is where we have to talk about Israel's plan for Gaza. Israel's plan for Gaza.
Well, before we go on to our Gaza, please, if I can just answer before we talk
very
about
quickly,
Gaza, you've made some very serious accusations which are unjustified, unbased, and quite honestly offensive. I'm not saying you've made the accusations, but Miko's accusations. The guy is an unhinged anti-Semite, but that's a different conversation. And I know he's Jewish. That doesn't mean that he can't make anti-Semitic statements, and he's made plenty of them in the past. But I'm not talking here about Miko Peled. I'm going to talk to you. I'm a father. I have 2 children. My children go to schools in Israel. My children have been educated in the Israeli school system. And they are not taught to hate. They are taught to love. They are taught to look and care for the other. And they are taught that the greatest value that Israel has is the value of peace. If you ask my children what they want, they will tell you they want peace. My children say to me every day, how come we're still in a war? All we want to do, Abba means dad in Hebrew, is all we want to do is we want peace. So an accusation by, Miko Peled, who may have had a very weird teacher, is utterly unfounded and it's utterly ridiculous. And I can tell you that because my children go there. And I know that all of my friends who have children who go to Israeli schools and do that are not taught or educated in that way whatsoever. It's preposterous, it's outrageous, and it's utterly wrong. But that's the first thing on that education.
We don't have much time.
Crazy accusation.
Okay, all right. Let's talk about the Brits who were refused entry into Israel. Earlier this week. I would like to play what they said at the British House of Parliament.
Heard it.
Not you. No. We must not.
We're wasting time.
No. I'll tell you why. The reason is, Ambassador, my listeners, we must remember we have listeners, over 1 million listeners of this show. So some of them may not have heard this. I just want them to hear. It's only short. What those 2 women, female British MPs, what they said at the Houses of Parliament in the UK. Let's play, please. It's not long.
Mr. Speaker, how will this end? Israel cannot and will not stop. Is the goal ethnic cleansing? We are witnessing this. Is the goal complete destruction of Gaza? We are now witnessing this. Is the goal permanent occupation of Gaza and the West Bank? We continue to witness this. Israeli ministers have made their intentions clear. Will the minister unequivocally condemn their actions for what they are, war crimes and crimes against humanity?
We would like more action, and we do not think the current action is enough. And so I would like to remind him of the comments previously made by the Prime Minister on looking into sanctions against Minister Ben-Gvir and Minister Smotrich for their comments supporting the illegal resettlement of northern Gaza. And I ask when he may be able to give us an update on that issue.
Right. So why were those British MPs, I think one of them is Absalom, the second woman, Yuan Yang, why were they refused entry into the UK, especially as they're British? And of course, Israel and Britain, their allies.
But Israel has very clear immigration laws, like any country has immigration laws. These 2 particular parliamentarians have spent the last while calling to boycott Israel, to sanction Israel, and have accused Israel of many malicious and false allegations. On Israel's immigration website, it's very, very clear that says people who call for the boycott of the Jewish state, for the sanctioning of the Jewish state, for ending the Jewish state, will not be allowed to enter into the country. It's very, very clear. Every country in the world has the right to decide who can come in and who can't come in. We decided that these two particular MPs who are calling for sanctions and for calling for boycotting the state of Israel, which I always find quite weird that they want to accuse us of all sorts of different things and call to boycott, but then get upset when they can't come into the very country they're calling to boycott. And so they weren't allowed in. This was much more of a PR stunt. I think they were very aware they wouldn't be allowed when they came in than anything else. And we have the right to reject anybody. Every country does it. I remember that Britain, by the way, a number of years ago, rejected an Israeli member of parliament, a gentleman called Yehuda Glick. They felt that he was not what Britain wanted into their country, and they rejected him for coming in. So every country has the right to refuse visas. We know that. We know that many, many people do not get visas. The difference here is that in Israel, you don't have to apply for a visa in advance. You come, you get it at the immigration. When they were questioned by immigration, they were made it clear what they were going to do and why they were there. And on that basis, they were not permitted to enter the country. Same rules that anybody has anywhere in the world. You know that you don't have the right to an American visa.
Okay, let me play a short clip for you. Ehud Barak, the former prime minister to Israel. I'd like to play. I might, because of time, because everybody's already calling. Let me play this for you.
Do you think that Bibi Netanyahu and the people around him actually want the reoccupation of Gaza, followed by then massive population expulsion of Palestinians, which will then lead to the Trump plan of a vacant Gaza?
It sounds a little bizarre, but the science on the table is that they are heading there somehow. Netanyahu already established a kind of a new entity under the umbrella of the Minister of Defense. The IDF refused to take part of it. That will be organizing the transfer of the willing. Now, if it was about to come to New York, North America, even Canada, people might find some 100,000, 200,000. But if it goes to Somaliland or other places like this, no one will want to move. And anyhow, it's totally impractical. I believe that it was a good idea that launched by Trump to shake the whole thing and impose both Israel and the Egyptians, and so this to bring some more realistic ideas. And I think and I believe that Witkoff and President Trump understand that that's not realistic.
I've been told by friends of mine in Israel that the IDF, the army, would actually probably refuse to participate in a forced ethnic expulsion of 2 million Palestinians.
Yeah, I hope that's the case. The IDF as an organization will probably refuse, and it will be very costly if they want, because the international community will come after Israeli officers and leaders, political leaders, and will demand accountability. But there is a huge debate, especially right now, following 7th of October. There is still, after a year and a half, a strong pain and deep kind of rage and feeling of humiliation and calls for revenge, which are humane, natural. You cannot even criticize those kind of emotions coming after the barbarian attack of Hamas. But having said that, that's not a good recipe for strategic mind, for leadership. And so leadership should see the vision over the immediate emotions, however humane and justifiable on individual, even collective terms. Strategy should be led by a clear-cut, sober, painfully sober realities and decision how to move forward. Otherwise, you pay the price of not having this kind of thought in advance.
Right. Ambassador, that was Ehud Barak, the former Prime Minister of Israel. It's interesting what he says, and of course he says nobody can blame the human emotions, naturally. But where is the strategy that from Prime Minister Netanyahu to actually put a stop to these killings and ensure that the Israeli hostages come back home, which is what the families are asking for? I need to go to the lines. If you can just think about that whilst I go to the lines. Otherwise, my co-host who my listeners will never forgive me. We didn't get to speak to them last week. Can you just write that down and I'll come to you? I'm coming to your calls now in 30 seconds. You can't use up time. We don't have the time. Hello? Okay. Hello? Hello?
Good evening. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you, Titilok. But very quickly, 30 seconds.
Yes. First question. Donald Trump is about having a new meeting with Iran now concerning their nuclear weapon. Bearing in mind that Barack Obama initially approved the nuclear deal for Iran, Donald Trump came in his first term, cancelled it. Now he's about having a new deal with Iran. What does he feel about that? How does he feel about the nuclear new deal to be Trump?
Well, he's the ambassador of Israel, not the ambassador of Iraq or Iran. So
No. I said America is about meeting Iranian authority, talking about their nuclear plan. Initially, he has repudiated that deal, which Obama initially...
Yes, I understand that. What? Yes, I understand. So what's your question?
How does Ambassador Mike feel about the new talk? Yes.
Okay, the new conversation between Iran and United States. Right. Can you write that down, sir? I'm going to come to you in a second. There's another call coming in. Can you make notes of the ambassador? Hello?
I've got the questions.
Yes.
Yeah, it's Manuel.
Go ahead, Emmanuel. 30 seconds.
Your guest thinks that Ireti and her colleague, that is the press word, deserve an apology for killing more journalists than any other conflict in the world. That's one. Number two, your guest said they didn't unleash the gates of hell on the Palestinians, which means he has an idea of what the gates of hell look like. Can he give us the description of the gates of hell he's trying to paint?
Okay.
Number three question.
Oh no, you can't do three. We don't have the time. I'm sorry. Right. I'm going to give you 2 minutes there because we're running out of time. And because...
I can answer them very quickly.
Yes, go ahead. Very quickly. Thank you, Ambassador.
First question. The entire conflict here is based on Hamas killing 1,000 people, raping women, murdering, butchering, torturing alive, burning alive on October the 7th and kidnapping 250 hostages. Without that happening, none of the war, none of the destruction, none of anything we would be being seen. If Hamas releases the 59 hostages, this is all over. That's number one. Number two, in questions to Iran, look, we are very clear, and America is very clear, that Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. Iran has launched...
Who is America to tell anybody, any country, not to have a nuclear weapon?
Please, you do this. You let me finish.
Sorry,
I'll explain why.
Because we're running out of time.
Sentence.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I know, but I'll finish my sentence. You'll understand. Iran cannot be allowed a nuclear weapon for the very following reason. Iran is not a responsible member of the international community. Iran sponsors Hamas, it sponsors Hezbollah, it sponsors the Houthis, it sponsors destabilization in Iraq and all of the different groups there. Iran has said their stated goal is the destruction of Israel and America, but that's their stated goal. They have said in the past that their aim if they built a nuclear weapon would be to use it on us. Okay. Iran has fired rockets on Israel on numerous occasions. That's why we can't have it, because they only need to fire one, and that's the end of the state of Israel. So Iran can never have a nuclear weapon, and we need to make sure that stays there. Secondly, in terms of the question about journalists. Yes. Look, just because somebody says they're a journalist doesn't make them a journalist. A number of these people, if I say to you tomorrow I'm a journalist, that doesn't make me a journalist, is what I'm saying to you. Many of these people who have been killed were never journalists. And even if they were journalists, they were acting in a dual role. We have a number of them who held hostages in their houses. We have a number of them who were pictured and seen with guns and seen with rockets. I don't have a list in front of me at the moment, but if we come on again or beforehand, I'll send you a list of all of these people who claimed to be journalists and been pictured on, then being proven to be Hamas terrorists. Those journalists that were legitimate journalists have been killed. It's a tragedy fighting in a war zone is a terrible, terribly difficult thing to do, especially when Hamas are using civilians as human shields.
All right. The gates of hell. He said, which gates of hell are you referring to?
Well, that was the President Trump's phrase, that if we didn't release the hostages, then gates of hell would open. What we're saying is that we will increase the pressure on Hamas militarily until they release the hostages. I'm obviously not going to give you our military strategy, not that I know it, but were I to know it, I certainly wouldn't give you what our military strategy was.
Okay. Israeli Air Force people were dismissed for writing a letter condemning the war efforts. They complained that the war was political and endangers Israelis who can be charged for war crimes. Why dismiss them? Especially as we're seeing what's happening to IDF in different countries, members of the IDF. Why dismiss them?
Well, the letter was signed, as you know, by a number of people. The vast majority were military
reservists.
The vast majority were no longer serving, even as reservists. The vast majority, I think out of 1,000 signatures, 960 were no longer serving. So there were only 40 that were actually serving, even in the reserves. Israel is a country that has an army that is built based on a reserve force, and based on that, and the Prime Minister and the army said that there can be no place in the country for a call to refusal. We can all have political differences, but those political differences stop when we join the army, because it's a people's army. And if people say, I'm not going to serve because I disagree with this policy or disagree with that policy, then the army wouldn't stand. So that's and it was, by the way, that decision was backed across the board, and there's universal agreement on that in Israel.
Okay, if you can answer me this question within a minute, so I can still pick up calls, because I've still got about 3 minutes, very quickly. If you can answer this in 1 minute. What's the status of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu politically in Israel right now?
Well, he's the Prime Minister, and there are different conversations, and the opinion polls say that the country is split at the moment, and when we have elections, we will see what the decision is, but there's no question that 100% of the country is behind Prime Minister Netanyahu in the aim of returning the hostages. You know, this evening, or tomorrow evening, we start the Passover, the Jewish festival of Pesach, or Passover. And that's the story of when Moses led the people of Israel, by the way, 3,000 years ago, out of Egypt into Israel. And the
which
promised
included
land,
Palestinians, but yes, let's continue.
No, I don't know where that's come from. It absolutely didn't. But anyway, it's 3,000 years ago, was the children of Israel left Egypt and were taken to Israel by Moses. And one of the things that Moses said to Pharaoh at the time, in a message from God, was, let my people go. And my message today to Hamas, to those people holding our hostages, let my people go.
What about the 3,000 Palestinians, 3,000 plus Palestinians that B'Tselem say are held under Israeli administrative detention?
Well,
does that include, should they also be let go?
Well, no, they're administrative detention.
The administrative detention is they haven't been found guilty. Let's not twist what it means, because the British.
Okay, but can I explain what it means so that your callers know? You know, the same way you play clips so your callers can know. I think it's important they know. Administrative detention is something that's left over from the British mandate.
Correct.
It is a policy. It is a policy that says when somebody, before they are brought to a full court, they can be arrested and held because there is a suspicion of a serious crime. And that a judge sits, sees all of the evidence, and makes a ruling about whether or not the evidence is strong enough to hold them. And every few months, that information needs to come to a judge, and a judge has to retake the decision of whether to hold them or not. It's not that they're stuck in a place without anybody seeing it. It is held in a country that is at war. It is at war with a brutal, radical terror organization that wants to kill us all. And therefore, there are tools that are used that are not tools that are used in every place all of the time.
Okay, you can go. I was just about to answer that. 30 seconds, whoever you are. Hello.
Yeah, good evening,
Good evening, 30 seconds. Go ahead. Your name, where you're calling from, and your question.
Good evening, Basando.
Go ahead.
You Triple A from Ojo. I'm referring everybody to Exodus chapter 14:14. So everybody should be careful about Israel. God bless Israel.
I have no idea what that meant, but I'm sure you do. Right, so we're almost out of time right now. You mentioned about you said about the reservists that most of them are ex-reservists, etc. You said that that Israel is that Prime Minister Netanyahu wants to get the hostages out. Yet the families, we have seen families of hostages constantly protesting, demanding that the lives of their family members be put ahead of this war, right? Now, the other thing that Ehud Barak said is that the IDF may refuse to obey any orders to ethnically cleanse Gaza. I'd like you to close on that. If you can do that, gosh, we have a minute. I'm about to go to the news.
We're very
5:59.
It's a ridiculous comment because there's absolutely no order to ethnically cleanse Gaza. There is no policy to ethnically cleanse Gaza. There's no campaign to get rid of the Palestinians from Gaza. That isn't our policy. We have no intention of forcing anybody to leave Gaza. We do not want to. It isn't a policy. It isn't a guideline. So that's a very easy thing because there's no law for them not to, there's no order for them to implement or not implement because it's not our policy. Israel has absolutely no territorial desire over the Gaza Strip, full stop. In answer to the question about the families, everybody wants the hostages home. Everybody wants the hostages home. There is a disagreement about what the best tactic is. The Prime Minister, the government, and by the way, all of the security services,
We have to go.
all of the security services agree that we need more military pressure to bring them home. We need to bring them home. Let my people go.
Right. Thank you so much, Ambassador Michael Freeman. As always, interrogative, enlightening, with mutual respect. Thank you for joining Borderlines again. You will be back. Of course, you know that already.
Of course.
Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you. And you.
99.3 Nigeria Info. We are more than just radio. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Nigeria Info FM. Check us out on Facebook at Nigeria Info 99.3. Follow us on Twitter at Nigeria Info FM and on Instagram at Nigeria Info FM Lagos for live updates as it happens. 99.3 Nigeria Info. Let's talk. 99.3 Nigeria Info. We are more than just radio. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Nigeria Info FM. Check us out on Facebook at Nigeria Info 99.3. Follow us on Twitter at Nigeria Info FM and on Instagram at Nigeria Info FM Lagos for live updates as it happens.